Welcome back to the Artie Lange Show. My first guest written a real interesting book. It's something that goes inside the science of extraordinary athletic performance. And it's a controversial thing. There's racial issues that come up with this. They have to come up when you bring up a subject like this. And it's very sensitive, but, you're dealing with science here, and facts are facts. And curious to hear how David came to write this and what happened along those lines. Please welcome from the author of The Sports Gene, there it is, David Epstein. Back to the show. What's up, man?
Nothing much.
How
Thanks
you
for
doing?
having me back. I'm doing well. Happy to be
No
here.
problem. So, you got Jimmy the Greek drunk and gets fired because he drunkenly says that black people are just naturally better athletes.
Yeah.
And he talks about breeding and slaves and stuff like that.
He was drunk?
He was loaded. Yeah, he was in a bar.
I didn't know that.
Actually, Robin Williams had a funny stand-up line when all that happened. He goes, listen, the guy was drunk in a bar. Give Gandhi a few cocktails. And he was like, listen, they're fast. What can I say? But so how does the racial component fit into what you're talking about here?
So first of all, it's sort of, I'm writing a book about genetics in sports. I can't ignore sort of the overrepresentation of people with specific geographic ancestry in certain sports, namely black people in running sports. That said, I was very not drunk when I took this issue on in the book.
You didn't write the book drunk at all.
Right.
But
Maybe a little, but
here's the thing. Well, James Joyce did a lot of good work, Loaded.
Yeah.
But you, I think, was he also the guy who said the extra bone in the ankle thing? Was that
Jimmy the Greek?
Was that Jimmy the Greek who said black people have an extra bone in their ankle?
I think so.
I think he said like the longer heel bone or something.
the
like that.
longer
Or at
Achilles
least that
or
was
something.
something.
He was getting into a weird area there where,
Yeah.
So like, tell us what happened here. What did you find out?
Well, so basically, there's a section in the book before I even get into talking about black athletes where I talk about what race does and doesn't mean from a genetic perspective in the first place.
Right.
And so if you say, like, because all of we outside of Africa came out of Africa not very long ago. So our ancestors were in Africa for a really long time, building up all these genetic variations. And then a tiny group, maybe as small as a couple hundred people from that population left and started populating the rest of the world, right?
A couple hundred people.
Yeah, so they took a tiny portion, subset of genetic variation. So if you got rid of all we white people, frankly, you would hardly lose anything from the genetic variation of the entire human species.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't realize that was the case. That smaller group of people.
Right. So the first issue I take on there is that African populations are much more genetically diverse than non-African populations.
Right.
And I think, and the rest of us are just kind of a subset of a subset that left Africa. So I think I approach it from a stance where, I look at this as Africans being more genetically diverse, not stereotyping them. And in fact, if you look at the black athletes that dominate running, right, it's athletes from a tiny swath of West Africa that dominate sprinting sports. Every man who's been in an Olympic 100-meter final since the boycotted games of 1980, whether his homeland is Canada, United States, Jamaica, Portugal, Netherlands, all from a tiny swath of West Africa.
Really?
And in East Africa,
What swath are we talking?
It's two areas called the Bight of Benin and the Bight of Biafra, where where we basically wrenched people from their homes and brought them here.
Right.
So.
Wow, and you traced that back? You did that yourself, or was this a known fact?
No, I know it's known, and it's now been verified by the genetic work, and so that and I'll sort of tell you why in a sec. But and when we go to the East African athletes, right? So we think of Kenyans as being great marathoners.
That's the go-to joke,
right?
when you say Kenya. That's the stereotype,
right?
Yeah.
But in Kenya, they think of the Kalenjin tribe, which is a small minority tribe, 10% of the population that is all the great runners. They think of the Kalenjin. They're like, whoa, those Kalenjin, man, those guys can run. Oh, that's what like other Kenyans think, and they have a very specific geographic ancestry. So you have black athletes dominating running sports, but in many ways, these people could not be more physiologically distinct in terms of what they're actually good at. So just saying black is very, doesn't tell you a whole lot about their genome.
Doesn't make any sense.
Other than that they have genes that code for the skin that protects them from equatorial sunlight. That they have in common.
Right. So, I mean, what you're saying is basically, it's not really a racist thing to make that statement that certain people from certain areas are better, are genetically more inclined to be a better athlete.
Well, their body types, their physiology fits into certain athletic niches better, right?
Right.
So for example, these Kalenjin, one of the reasons they're so good is because their ancestry is at really low latitude. Like I was crisscrossing the equator when I was visiting them in a very hot and dry climate. And the evolutionary adaptation for that is very narrow pelvic breadth, long, thin limbs for cooling. It's the same reason a radiator has coils to increase the surface area compared to the volume to let heat out. And since your leg is like a pendulum, the longer and thinner it is, the much more energy efficient it is to swing. So like if you look down and you have thick ankles, you're just not going to win the New York City Marathon ever, like period. I'm sorry. And so that's terrible for swimming though.
Right.
You want a long torso and short legs for swimming. So like Michael Phelps, who's 6'4", has the same inseam as the guy who's 5'9" and holds the world record in the mile.
It is amazing how some swimmers start to look like fish.
Yeah. So
it's crazy.
So it's not better. It's just it fits into a different niche. And in the United States, of course, we mostly prize power and explosion sports, which and this in a small area of West Africa, you have a group of people who, and I write about evidence that they have these genetic adaptations that protect them from malaria that caused a shift to slightly higher proportions on average of fast twitch muscle fibers in that
How does
population.
that protect you from malaria?
So all the studies that have been done so far have shown that people from that area tend, just on average, not talking about every individual, tend to have a higher proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers. So that's sort of done in the science. The more speculative part is the evidence that it comes from malaria adaptation, and so I want to make clear that some of that is still unknown. But the idea being that there are these genetic adaptations like sickle cell, right, that we know African Americans have a lot, that put them at a huge disadvantage for endurance sports because it causes your blood cells to change in a way that impairs your blood flow when you exercise really hard in an endurance way. So West Africans are highly underrepresented in endurance sports for this reason. And there are other and the reason that sickle cell hangs around, even though it can have these bad health effects, is because it's protective against malaria. So it's like an evolutionary trade-off. It'll be disappearing in the United States because African Americans don't need it anymore, but it's still very prevalent in West Africa. And so there are other mutations like that, and the evidence I discuss in the book is this idea that because those decreased the ability of these athletes to make energy through aerobic pathways with oxygen, it caused a compensatory mechanism, a shift to more energy pathways that don't need oxygen, which is what fast twitch muscle fibers are. So
that's right. And the two of the big three American sports are dominated by African Americans. I mean, you got football and basketball, and a lot of that might be sociological because it's a way out of the ghetto. Without question. And you go at it better to make money and get out. And hopefully, if you don't want your kids to be exposed to the horrors of football or whatever, those people make money and then they send them to college, and it's a big evolutionary thing. But so there's those factors. But like baseball right now, did you do any research on like why Dominicans or something, or Hispanic or South American or Central American people just happen to be good at what it takes to be a good baseball player?
Yeah, so baseball is an interesting case because like it's like a joke to call it the World Series, right? It's like anything but a World Series. So one thing is with sports where only a few countries actually care, you always have an overrepresentation from those countries because they're actually doing talent filtering. So in the first chapter of the book, I discuss why Jenny Finch, the great softball pitcher, can strike out like Albert Pujols. It turns out that baseball players have totally pedestrian reaction times. Like I scored better on a reaction time test than Albert Pujols did.
Well,
yeah.
It's a completely different thing, right?
It's very much learned. I thought this was an innate skill, but it turns out that actually we don't have biology fast enough to track the ball when it gets close. So you could close your eyes when the ball's halfway to home. It would be psychologically upsetting, but it would make no difference otherwise because it takes a fifth of a second to initiate muscular action. That's half the time of the pitch. So these guys have learned through practice how to interpret the movement of the pitcher's shoulder, the flicker of the ball, which is the flashing pattern of the seam.
Isn't it amazing
to predict where it's going?
The numbers of baseball? It's amazing how they came up with that. 90 feet base to base, like the plays that are like bang bang plays, the double plays are just like it seems like somebody just thought it's perfect. 60 feet 6 inches. If it were half a foot closer, people would hit 180. It's just amazing how the numbers worked out in baseball, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that very easily you could almost make the sport impossible. Like if they moved it too much closer.
You see a guy like the first time you ever saw Dwight Gooden pitch, you go, okay, here's a guy where no one will ever hit him. Yeah. But somehow the numbers are just enough where a pro hitter can figure out how to hit the guy.
And only through learning those anticipatory cues that allow them to not have to react because you can't react fast enough, which is why they can't hit Jenny Finch, even though the ball takes the same amount of time. But one thing they do have once
Wait,
they
I don't understand the difference. They can't hit
sorry.
Jenny Finch
Well, it's
because
closer.
it's a release.
right, because
that's-
they are based. So like in simulations, if you delete a pitcher's shoulder, they become novices again because they need that cue. They don't know they're picking up on this, but they need certain body cues to tell where the
Got
pitcher's
it.
going. And if you change those and the spin of the ball and the shoulder movement, they're like just like you and I.
Which
They're
is why
totally
a
scripted.
sidearm pitcher, if he can perfect that style, can be very effective.
And I think it's why you look at a guy like Hideo Nomo, right? He comes in with a non-traditional windup. He's like the world beater his first year, and he gets worse every year after that.
I think that non-traditional crazy wind-up thing really freaks me out. I think I can see why a hitter would get freaked out by that. You know, or knuckleball, stuff like that. You know, you don't know what to do. That is fascinating. But there's no link with Dominican, Hispanic. It doesn't like. Where...
So no, not that I'm aware of. But what the hitters do have, even though their ability to hit these balls is very much learned perceptual expertise, totally learned. But they do, major league hitters have 20/12 visual acuity on average, meaning they can see from 20 feet away what I see from 12 feet away.
Right.
But once they've learned those skills, the better they can pick that, the earlier they can pick that stuff up, the better. And that vision's pretty rare. And so I think what's going on in the Dominican Republic is you're putting a large number of people into this talent funnel, and you have a much better chance of finding your 2012 people who can make it to the top.
All right.
That's my opinion.
That's just
some of
pure,
that's my
pure
speculation.
numbers at that point.
I think so.
And also an insane. I think a lot of that insane desire to just get out of
For sure.
insane poverty.
No
too,
question.
And you see other role models. It's fascinating. We're gonna take a break. You stick around.
As long as you want.
Take a break, and we'll be back with the author of the Sports Gene, David Epstein, right after this.